Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on what might be on the ban list radar for the Rules Committee. So, before we get any further into this, I just want to clarify a few things. First off, I have no insider information on what the Rules Committee is thinking when it comes to banning certain cards. Again, I'm just going to be giving you my thoughts on what cards that I think they might be considering and why. Secondly, just because I bring a card up and talk about the rational explanation as to why it might be banned at some point does not mean that I actually want the card banned. In fact, I've been very much against most bans. Well, okay, except for Lutri. Yeah, Lutri definitely had to go. But we're not getting back into that. Anyways, on the Rules Committee's website back in the 2021 April update, in regards to bans, they said, "We do have our eyes on some cards, but want to wait until we have more in-person play to get a sense for how they would impact the format. So some cards are definitely on the ban list radar, and they might be banned at some point, but they wouldn't be immediately banned. So logically, it would make sense that the cards that are being considered for bans and are on the ban list radar are ones that are newer since they haven't seen in-person play." So again, that article came out in April, so most likely these cards are toward the end of last year or at the beginning of this year. Now, on top of that, recently we also got an article from the face of the Rules Committee, Sheldon Menery, with the top 20 Commander cards in Modern Horizons 2. Now, aside from those top 20 cards, Sheldon also had this quote: "Modern Horizons 2 reinforces that wheels are the unhealthiest thing in Commander, with cards like Dothy Voidwalker and Sanctifier and Vac and Guy's Will, I suppose. This is a deep concern to me and is going to undergo a great deal of thought. Banning an entire class of cards is awkward at best, potentially politically suicidal at its worst." Now, yeah, of course the Rules Committee is not going to ban an entire class of cards with wheels. And while I very much disagree with the statement that wheels are the unhealthiest thing in Commander, that's not the reason that I'm bringing this up. The reason I'm bringing this up is that this discussion on wheels might give a hint as to what cards are on the ban radar. So not wheels themselves, but cards that might be seen as problematic with them. Now again, I just want to reiterate that these are just my guesses as to what cards are on their ban radar. With all that said though, let's jump into what cards that I think are most likely currently being considered for a ban. And the first card that I think has a high likelihood of being on their ban list radar is Hullbreacher. This is a $24 card that currently sees play in 18% of eligible decks. It's a 3/2 Merfolk Pirate with Flash that costs 2 and a blue. It says if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, instead you create a treasure token. So let's break things down and talk about why this card is probably on the ban list radar. First up, this card came out in Commander Legends, which came out the end of November last year. So again, a newer card that hasn't seen a lot of in-person play. Secondly, to put it lightly, this card is incredibly powerful with wheels. If this is in play and you wheel, making everyone discard their hand and draw 7 cards, you essentially just win. Again, it says if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, instead, keyword there, instead, you create a treasure token. So essentially, you get a full hand, your opponents don't draw any cards so they have no hand, and you get 21 treasure tokens, assuming that you've got 3 opponents. Yeah, that's game over. Obviously, outside of wheels, it can still be incredibly impactful with something like an X draw spell that an opponent casts, and you just basically steal that draw and turn it into treasure. But yeah, with wheels especially, this is a card that could be seen as problematic. And the last factor as to why I think this is being considered for a ban is the amount of play that it's seeing. Percentage-wise, again, I said it's in 18% of eligible decks, and that puts it up there in the top 100 cards. At least according to EDH Rec and their percentages. So yeah, for all these reasons, I think that this card is probably the number 1 on the Rules Committee's list for cards that are being considered for a ban. Now again, remember that I'm not saying that it will be banned or it should be banned, I am saying that it is probably on their radar. And I'm pretty positive that this one is, and if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say, I don't know, 90% or whatnot that it's on their radar, okay? Again though, this is definitely not the only card on their radar. In fact, we can essentially guarantee that there are multiple cards because, again, their quote was, "We do have our eyes on some cards," so that implies multiple. So another card that I believe is on their ban list radar is Turgid, God of Salt. Sorry, Turgid, God of Fright. According to EDH Rack, Turgid is currently the commander of 1,200 decks, making her the 128th most popular commander. And as a card in the 99, she currently sees play in an additional 3,521 decks, or 4% of eligible decks. She's a 4/5 god with menace that costs 3 black, and she has whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And she is an MDFC commander, and on the backside we've got Turgid's Lantern. It's a legendary artifact for 3 and a black that has tap. Target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card, and by paying 3 and a black we untap it. Turgid came out in Kaldheim, which was released on February 5th of this year. So again, a relatively new card that has not seen a lot of in-person play. And secondly, she is very impactful with wheels that discard, and some other things that many players may not enjoy, like, sacrificing everything including lands. Like I've said before, she's essentially a better It That Betrays that costs a lot less, it's in your command zone, and has a backside that essentially just wins you the game if you've got infinite mana. She's incredibly easy to build, incredibly overpowered. Just cast 1 Pox effect and you essentially win. Am I being somewhat salty about the God of Salt? Yes. Regardless, for all these reasons, I do think that Turgid is on the ban list radar. That being said, let's talk about the likelihood of a ban. Although this commander has only been out for a few months, she already sees a ton of play as a commander. Again, like I said before, she's currently the 128th ranked commander. So in another few months, I bet she breaks the top 100 pretty easily. Now, whereas where I mentioned with Hullbreacher that it's seeing a ton of play, and that's a reason it could be considered for a ban because it's just pretty much everywhere and it might be causing problems in a lot of places, I don't think that same argument might apply to Turgid simply because of the fact that, well, it's a commander, and those are going to be harder to ban. Out of all the cards on the commander ban list, there really aren't many commanders, especially that are banned. In recent years, the only commanders that we really actually seen banned are Lutri the Spellchaser and Iona Shield of Emeria. And these are very different situations than Turgid. Like I mentioned before, Lutri is one of the few bans that I do agree with, and yeah, it definitely should be banned not because of it as a commander, but because of it as a companion. It's essentially just a free extra card for every single deck that has blue and red. So that's why it was banned. And then as for Iona, it's also a different situation than Turgid, but I want to mention really quick that this one I definitely disagree with the banning on. Regardless, Iona wasn't a commander that saw a ton of play. In fact, like many mono-white commanders, it didn't see very much play at all. Regardless, a different situation than Turgid, which is already seeing a lot of play. And actually, in my opinion, the fact that this one is seeing a lot of play already is probably why it actually won't be banned. Banning a singular card in the 99 is probably going to be easier than banning a commander. If you ban a card in the 99 like Hullbreacher, those cards can be replaced in the decks that they are in. But if a commander is banned like Turgid, well then those players that have it as their commander are out an entire deck. So, although many may see this as a problematic commander, and it's most likely on the Rules Committee's radar, I don't think they're going to pull the trigger on this one. Which is ironic because, again, not that I'm saying that I want this banned, but it's kind of ironic that Turgid isn't banned, but Braids is. Braids would not be seeing anywhere near as much play as Turgid and would not be causing anywhere near as much of a problem, but yet, it is banned. Hashtag free Braids. But anyways, next up I want to talk about some more cards that might be on the ban list radar, though they're not quite as new as these two. So the first card that might be on the ban list radar is Narset, Parter of Veils. Narset currently sees play in 13% of eligible decks. She's a planeswalker that starts off at 5 starting loyalty and costs 1 blue. And she has a static ability that reads, each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. So although this card came out in War of the Spark and it's not all that new of a card, it does interact in a very powerful way with wheels. Like Hullbreacher, when you wheel with this, you basically end up with a full hand and your opponents end up with, well, almost nothing. So that can be seen as problematic as it can easily shut players out of the game. Now, will they actually ban Narset? Well, if I had to guess in comparison to Hullbreacher, I'd say that it's less likely. In comparison to Turgid, it's probably more likely. But again, those are just my thoughts. Next up, another card that very well might be on the ban list radar is Smothering Tithe. This card is seeing an absurd amount of play with 35% of eligible decks. That means over the past 2 years, it is the 12th most played card according to EDH Rec. It sees more play than the majority of Signets, Rampant Growth, Path to Exile, etc, etc. This one came out in Ravnica Legion, so again, not all that new of a card. But like our previously mentioned cards, this card is broken with wheels. It's an enchantment for 3 and a white, and it says whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact at 1 mana of any color. 2 mana is a lot of mana to pay, and it's essentially impossible to do when someone wheels. So you essentially wheel, everyone draws 7 cards, including your opponents, so yeah, then they can't pay 2 for each of those cards, and you're making a ton of treasure. And then if you wheeled into another wheel, well, then you've got mana to wheel again. That makes you more treasure, and then you wheel again, and you see where this is going. Now again, let me remind you that I'm not saying I want this card banned, because I know there are plenty of fans of this card out there. In defense of this card, many players will say, well, white finally gets a way to ramp and you want to take that away? And because of that perception, no matter how powerful this card is, I don't think it's ever going to be banned. But I personally think that that perception is incorrect. This card doesn't help out mono-white decks because it helps out any deck that has white. And there are a lot more of those out there than just mono-white decks. The casting cost for this card is not restrictive at all. Because of that, any deck that has white and can afford it, can run it, and probably will run it. If the casting cost for this card was more restrictive, like 1 white, 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 that would be a different story. And in that case, yes, then I would agree with the perception that this is a card that helps out mono-white. Regardless, with all that said, this card might be on the Rules Committee's radar, but I doubt it is ever going to see a ban. But now let's move on to the final card that I'm going to bring up that might be on their radar with Fierce Guardianship. This is a $37 card that sees play in 20% of eligible decks. This card came out in the Timeless Wisdom pre-constructed deck, which came out in spring of last year. So this is a card that has been around for a while in comparison to cards like Turgid and Hull Breacher, but it also hasn't seen a lot of in-person play. It's an instant for 2 and a blue that says if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost, counter-target non-creature spell. So in Commander, this is essentially a free negate most of the time. And free spells, especially free counter spells, can be seen as a very problematic thing by many players. Now, though it very well might be on the ban radar, I highly doubt that this one is going to be banned for one simple reason. If this one is banned, then there are going to be a lot of arguments to ban other free counter spells like Force of Negation, Force of Will, and Pact of Negation. And I personally don't think that they're going to go down that path. But I could be wrong about that, and in fact, I could be wrong about all of this. Again, this entire episode is based off my thoughts and perspective based on the information that we do have. So yeah, I could be very off as to what's actually on the ban list radar. And with that said, I would love to hear from you and your thoughts on this episode. So do you think I'm right or wrong on the cards that are on the ban list radar, and why? And is there a card that I didn't mention that you think should have been mentioned? Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.